Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Dao De Jing. We are on number 25. That's one of my favorites, probably my absolute favorite. Because for me, it is the best overview of Dao De Jing that I've found. Of it, I think I hold the entire book by that 25. If I wanted to pick it up, I pick it up with that. So that's my take on it. So let's get started. For those who are new, we have a format. Everybody reads their favorite translation of the poem or chapter we are studying. If you have your own translation that you made, you're welcome to share that as well. After which we will discuss it. And then if we have time, we will do 26, but we are in no hurry. All right, so who would like to go first? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark in chat or raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to read your version of 25. So we're going to start with Evanique, Joe, Judith, Dave, and Claudio. Evanique.
Okay, so mine's is from the title is As God Sees Nature. That's the translation. So before heaven and earth were born, there was something indescribable, perfectly still, having no form. It stands alone and does not change. It acts perpetually, yet never tires. It could very well be the mother of the universe. I don't know its name, so I just call it the Tao. If forced to give it a name, I will call it great. Being great, I call it eternal. Being eternal, I call it infinite. Being infinite, I call it reconciliation. Therefore, the Tao is great, heaven is great, the earth is great, humankind is also great. In the universe, there are these four things which are great, and humankind is one of them. Humankind follows the earth follows heaven, heaven follows the Tao, and the Tao just acts like itself.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. Next up is going to be Joe.
This is the Wayne Dyer version. It's the 25th verse. There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. I call it great. Great is boundless. Boundless is eternal flowing. Ever flowing, it is constantly returning. Therefore, the way is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. People are great. Thus, to know humanity, understand earth. To know earth, understand heaven. To know heaven, understand the way. To know the way, understand the great within yourself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Judith, Dave, Claudio, Brian, Allison, Krishna, and David. Judith.
This is the Stephen Mitchell translation. It starts out exactly like Joe's and then becomes a little different. There was something formless and perfect before the universe was born. It is serene, empty, solitary, unchanging, infinite, eternally present. It is the mother of the universe. For lack of a better name, I call it the Tao. It flows through all things, inside and outside, and returns to the origin of all things. The Tao is great. The universe is great. Earth is great. Man is great. These are the four great powers. Man follows the earth. Earth follows the universe. The universe follows the Tao, and the Tao follows only itself.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. Next up is Dave, followed by Claudio. Dave.
Thanks, Shrikant. There was something formed out of chaos that was born before heaven and earth, quiet and still, pure and deep. It stands on its own and doesn't change. It can be regarded as the mother of heaven and earth. I do not yet know its name. I style it the way. Were I forced to give it a name, I would call it the Great. Great means to depart. To depart means to be far away, and to be far away means to return. The way is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and the king is also great. In the country, there are 4 greats, and the king occupies one place among them. Man models himself on the earth models itself on heaven, heaven models itself on the way, and the way models itself on that which is so on its own.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Next up is Claudio, followed by Brian. Claudio.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, this translation's from James Legge, 1821. There was something undefined and complete coming into existence before heaven and earth. How still it was and formless, standing alone and undergoing no change, reaching everywhere and in no danger of being exhausted. It may be regarded as the mother of all things. I do not know its name, and I give it the designation of the Tao. Making an effort to give it a name, I call it the Great. Great, it passes on in constant flow. Passing on, it becomes remote. Having become remote, it returns. Therefore, the Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and the Sage King is also great. In the universe, there are 4 that are great, and the Sage King is one of them. Man takes his law from the earth takes its law from heaven, heaven takes its law from the Tao. The law of Tao is its being what it is. That's it.
Thank you. Next up is Brian, Allison, Krishna, and David. Brian.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to read from Yasuhiko Genku Kimura tonight. Before the birth of heaven and earth is being, formless yet complete, silent and still, all one and unchanging, all present and unending. It may be regarded as the matrix of the universe. Its true name is unknown, so we call it by its alias, the Tao, and name it by its designation, the Great. Being great, it extends without limit. Extending without limit, it is far-reaching. Being far-reaching, it returns to itself. The Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and man is also great. These are the 4 greatnesses of the cosmos, and of them man is one. Man patterns after earth, earth patterns after heaven, heaven patterns after the Tao, and the Tao patterns after that which is natural.
Thank you, Brian. Next up is Allison, Krishna, and David. Allison.
This is the Sam Tarot version. The mother of all. There is being that encompasses all, and it existed before earth or the universe. Calm, indeed, and immaterial. It is singular and changeless. All creation flows from it and returns to it. It is the world's mother. I cannot define it, but I will call it Tao. If forced to describe it, I will call it great. The great is evasive. The great is distant. The distant is ever coming near. The Tao is great. So is the universe great. So is earth, and so is humanity. Humanity is the child of earth. Earth is the child of the universe. The universe is the child of the Tao. The Tao has no mother, but is mother of all.
Thank you, Allison. Next up is Krishna.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, if you could speak into the mic, that would help.
Okay. This is from Ursula Le Guin, and she titles the chapter Imagining Mystery. There is something that contains everything. Before heaven and earth it is, oh, it is still, embodied, all on its own, unchanging, all pervading, never moving, so it can act as the mother of all things. Not knowing its real name, we only call it the way. If it must be named, let its name be great. Greatness means going on. Going on means going far. And going far means turning back. So they say the way is great. Heaven is great. Earth is great. And humankind is great. 4 greatnesses in the world, and humanity is one of them. People follow the earth. Earth follows heaven. Heaven follows the way follows what is. Now, Ursula has a longish commentary, which I think is pretty important. So I'll read it. I'd like to call the something of the first line a lump, an unshaped, undifferentiated lump, chaos. Before the word, before form, before change, inside it is time, space, everything, in the womb of the way. The last words of the chapter, Tzu Tan, I render as what is. I was tempted to say the way follows itself, because the way is the way things are. But that would reduce the significance of the words. They remind us not to see the way as a sovereignty of domination, all creative, all yang. The way itself is a follower. Though it is before everything, it follows what is. That's all.
Wonderful. Thank you, Krishna. Let's see. Margarita, would you like to read your translation or in your language?
Okay. After this, I mean, you still have some people.
No, you can go ahead. You can go ahead.
Or-
And then we will have, because I don't, then Margarita is going to read in Spanish as well. So I want to keep one English between 2 different languages. Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I will read the text from Bahasa Indonesia.
Mhm.
Tao adalah ibu dari langit. Tao is the mother from the sky, the universe. Ada satu benda yang sifatnya samar, namun menjadi pencipta dari segala benda di seluruh alam semesta ini. Ia sudah ada terlebih dahulu sebelum ada langit dan bumi. Sifatnya suci dan kosong. Ia berdiri sendiri dan tidak berubah, langgeng dan abadi. Mengelilingi dan meliputi semuanya dengan tanpa berhenti dan tak ada akhirnya, sehingga dapat dikatakan ibu dari semesta alam. Aku tak mengetahui namanya. Aku catat dan menyebutnya Tao. Dari sifatnya yang demikian itu, aku namakan ia Maha Besar. Karena Maha Besar dapat mencapai di mana-mana, dapat dikatakan jauh. Karena jauh maka ia pergi, ia pun dapat kembali pula. Maka Tao itu besar, langit besar, bumi besar, tapi raja juga besar. Di dalam semesta alam ada 4 besar, di mana raja juga termasuk salah satu di antaranya. Manusia di dalam lingkungan hukum bumi, bumi di dalam lingkungan hukum langit, dan langit di dalam lingkungan hukum Tao. Sedangkan Tao adalah hukum sewajarnya. Yeah, that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. Next up is David. David, go ahead.
Yes, this is the Herman Old version. It's very literal. I'm not certain it's quite as poetic as some of his other translations. We'll see. So, before heaven and earth came into existence, there was that which, though formless, was complete, silent, still, unfathomable. It stands alone, unchanging, all-pervading, inexhaustible. One may think of it as the mother of the universe. What its real name is, I do not know. If I name it, I call it Tao. If I classify it, I call it supreme. Supreme means ever in flow. Ever in flow means going far away. Going far away means returning to the source. Therefore, we may say the Tao is supreme. Heaven too is supreme. The earth is supreme. A ruler of men may also be supreme. There are 4 things that are supreme, and a ruler of men is one of them. Man follows the standards of the earth follows the standards of heaven follows the standards of the Tao, and the Tao follows its own standard.
Wonderful, thank you. Amon had a request. By the way, anybody who has read Tao in any other language, Amon is talking about Slavic languages, but any language is welcome to read in that language, because each language has its own rhythm. And then when you read it, keep the points in mind, and you'll have a chance to talk about that. So, talk about what you got from that particular translation. So if anybody else wants to read, I know Maritza, I'm going to request her to read in Spanish before she talks about Sanskrit. Jason wants me to read it in Sanskrit. I'm trying to find Hindi. I don't know Sanskrit well enough. And I know about like 90%, but it's not good enough to be able to read. And I don't know if there is a good Sanskrit translation, but I'm actually trying to find a Hindi translation. I would love to find a Marathi translation, but I've not found one yet, because that's the language I really, really know well. So it's going to be Maritza, and if anybody else wants to read in any other language, go ahead and type ! Maritza, go ahead.
Okay, this is from Juan Ignacio Preciado. This is his 1978 translation. Hay una cosa confusamente formada, anterior al cielo y a la tierra, sin sonido, sin forma, de nada depende y permanece inalterada. Se la puede considerar el origen del mundo. Yo no conozco su nombre. Le denomino Tao. There is something confusedly formed before the sky and at the earth, without sound, without form. It depends on nothing and remains unaltered. It can be considered the origin of the world. I do not know its name, but I will give it the denomination of Tao. Forzado a darle otro nombre, la llamaría lo grande. Lo grande se desplaza constantemente. Al desplazarse constantemente es alejarse sin cesar. Alejarse sin cesar es regreso al punto de partida. El Tao es grande, la tierra es grande, el soberano también es grande. En el estado hay 4 grandes. Uno de ellos es el soberano. El hombre tiene por norma a la tierra. La tierra tiene por norma al cielo. El cielo tiene por norma al Tao. El Tao conforme a las leyes de la naturaleza. Es la norma de sí mismo. If I were forced to give it another name, I would call it the grand. The grand displaces itself constantly. At this displacement, at this constant displacement, it is furthering itself without cease. In furthering itself without cease, to further itself without cease is to return to the point of leaving. The Tao is large, the earth is large, the sovereign is also large. In the state, there are 4 largesses. One of them is the sovereign. The man has the earth as its norm. The earth has the sky as its norm. The sky has the Tao as its norm. The Tao, content with the laws of nature, has itself as the norm.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marisa. Next up is Elena, followed by Kevin. Elena.
All right. Let me see. I'm going to just move my laptop so we would avoid echo. Give me a second, please.
Okay, let's go with Kevin and then we'll come to you. Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to read the Chinese version.
Please.
Chapter 25. 有物红尘，先天地生，寂兮寥兮，独立不改，周行而不殆，可以为天下母。吾不知知之曰道，强为之曰大，大曰是，是曰远，远曰反。故道大，天大，地大，人亦大。狱中有四大，而人居其也。人法地，地法天，天法道，道法自然。And
Thank you, Kevin. Next up is Elena. Elena, you need to unmute yourself.
I'm here.
Yes. There is a big echo. I think you have two different devices. So if you could mute one of them.
Kind from the laptop, as I promised.
Yeah, that's better. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm reading it in Russian. It's very interesting. Существует нечто из хаоса возникшее. Рожденное прежде неба и земли. Беззвучно пустотное. Одиноко неизменчивое. Двигаясь по кругу, не устает. И способна быть матерью неба и земли. Я не знаю его имени, и иероглифом обозначаю это Дао. Через силу назову его еще великим. Великим назову скоротечным. Скоротечным назову отдаленным. Отдаленным назову обращающимся вспять. Поэтому Дао велико, небо велико, земля велика. Человек также велик. Во Вселенной пребывают эти четыре великих силы, и человек одно из них. Земля, небо, Дао. Дао же таково само по себе. And I will just give a little bit of interpretation here because it's entirely, there's some particular concepts are presented in a very different fashion, translated in a different fashion. So for instance, it says that I'm giving it a name, and it's not a name, it's hieroglyphics. So just go, it's like in Chinese, I'm going just to draw it. I'm not even going to give it a name. I'm just going to create a sign or whatever it is. And another thing that's been quite striking different is that it's that the whole concept here is Dao, the sky, the earth, and a human being. It's not even the Sage King, it's just human. That's how it's being interpreted here.
Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. I'm going to try to read it in Hindi. Hindi is not my preferred Indian language. I can read it. I grew up speaking Marathi, which is what I really, really understand. And I've read literature on, but know Hindi well enough. कुछ है जो अप्रभावित है, फिर भी संपूर्ण है, शाश्वत है. So there is something that has not been fully expressed, but it is complete and alive. जो धरती और आकाश से भी पहले से है, शांत और अपार, स्थिर है शुरुआत से और फिर भी मौजूद है, सब चीजों की उत्पत्ति का कारण है ये। मैं इसका नाम नहीं जानता, पर इसको दाओ के नाम से कहता हूं। इतना भव्य है कि यह टिका हुआ है, और जो टिका रहता है वो लंबे समय से रहता है, और जो लंबे समय तक रहता है वो शुरुआत से फिर आता है। दाओ भव्य है, धरती और स्वर्ग भी भव्य है, और जो दाओ के साथ एक है वो भी महान है। यही चार तो इस ब्रह्मांड में महान है। जो दाओ के साथ एक है वो धरती के साथ भी है, और धरती स्वर्ग के साथ है, और स्वर्ग ताओ के साथ है, और ताओ सभी के साथ है। So that is in Hindi. Next up is Jason.
Yes, I think this one, okay, let me share my screen again. It'll be easier.
Jason, thank you very much for holding this up for this time. I wanted to make sure that we had enough time to discuss it in detail.
The last two was easier, so I think we probably can. Okay, that's fine. I think this, okay, let me do my translation, okay. There is something like a nebula, okay, prior to heaven and earth. I use the word nebula and I discuss with Aman. I think Lao Tzu is trying to talk about like the beginning, the origin of the earth. So the word he used is something missing and not clear, something like this. So I think I use nebula probably like a nebula. So probably makes sense, but it's a little bit too scientific, too modern. So I have to apologize on this kind of translation, but you know, so, but I think that probably the proper word at this moment. And the next, it is soundless and formless, independent and unchanging, revolving endlessly. It may be thought of as the mother of the world. Okay, so here we're talking about the beginning. So I think everybody translates almost the same. I don't know its name, so I just call it Dao and arbitrarily name it Great. I think Elena called something like give a sign or something. I think the words in Chinese give this one called Qiang, strong. That means I was forced to give them that I unwilling because they really have no name. But if I have to explain to you, I just have to give a name. So I call it great or spring. Some I think who has the translation? Marisa called it the grand day, and then I think David translated called it the spring, right? So I think that's all great. So call it great. So to be great is to travel on. To travel on is to travel far. To travel far is to return. Okay, this one is from Amang. I think that's great. You know, Amang, notice the word. If you see these three words, 1, 2, 3, you probably see the side. Okay, they all have the same side on the right hand side. That's called radical. That means something travel, running. Okay. So Amang caught this one, so he suggests me do this translation. I think that's great. Okay, then next. Therefore, the Tao is great. The heaven is great. The earth is great. Man is also great. The great, you probably have to see this one. Okay, that's the great. This word is great. Okay, a lot of translation call it, like David called the ruler of the man, and Marisa called the sovereign, and then Elena translation called the human. I think the proper word is man. But I also highlight this one because some version use this word, okay, not man. This one is man, and this one is king, okay. So that's why some translation call it king or the sovereign or ruler. But I believe here is talk about nature, okay, universe. So I don't see they have a political sense in this chapter. So I believe even have a two version exists. So I believe we should go with man. Okay. So there are 4 greatness in the universe, and the man is one of them. So here put the man as a center. Okay. So I think that's his the universal view, cosmetic view, right? Talk about the earth. They have the Tao as the fundamental. They have heaven, they have earth, then they have a human, they have man. Okay, so including woman, basically I talk about. So I think that's his view of this universe. Okay, so the last sentence, man follows the way of earth. The earth follows the way of heaven. Heaven follows the way of Tao. And the Tao follow its own ways. So here, this one called 自然, it's important because I look at most of translation I heard translate as follow its own way. And that I know some translations say the Tao follow the nature. Okay, I believe that's wrong because I have mentioned last week and I think a few weeks before, 自然, these 2 words, in today's Chinese, everybody will say that's the nature, but I don't see in Dao De Jing, okay, they will use as a nature. They will use as its own way, or 自然 means yes, self, yes, okay, self-evident, okay, so that's the meaning. I don't see 自然, this word happen 5 times in the Dao De Jing. So, and I checked 5 of them, and none of them should be interpreted as nature. It should be on its own way. So, same as chapter 22, I think we also, a lot of translation call like the nature doesn't speak, or nature speak very few words. But I think the right translation should be it's evidence. You don't have to speak too much. So that's the translation. And I think the essence of this one and why Shuren Khan think that's important, because that represent probably the Taoism view of the universe. Okay, there's the Tao as a fundamental, heaven and earth and the human. I think that's why this one is important. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Amon, did you have any thoughts about the translation?
Yes, please don't get rid of the word nebula. I absolutely loved that interpretation. It may be anachronism, but it captures these 3 words, which basically mean something like matter, mixed, and into. And there's no elegant way to translate that, but matter or nebula absolutely encapsulates what that idea is expressing. And it fits so perfectly. I'll be heartsick if you actually take it out of your translation.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. All right. So now it's time for everybody to talk about what they got from it. You know, what did they get from this number 25? What's any comments that you have about it? Try to get an overview first, and then we can go into the details. So I'm going to start with, let's start with Dave, Elena, Evanik, Joe, Douglas, and Claudio. Dave.
Yeah, Shrikant, if I can, this is the Henrik's translation that's very scholarly. And you may have noticed I used the word style. And I know I missed a couple of weeks, but I can't remember that word being used before in the translation. So let me read the context, lines 6, 7, 8 in my translation, and then a footnote. It's just a couple sentences.
Please.
I won't take much time, but to me, it's great interest. I do not yet know its name. I style it the way. Were I forced to give it a name, I would call it the Great. Now the footnote. The name is given at birth, is very formal and rarely used in public address. The style is taken at capping age, when a young man becomes an adult, and is commonly used in public address with friends who are on friendly terms. To me, it kind of sound like a nickname or something like that, but I thought since it applies to the way, I thought that would be of interest to everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great observation. It's basically somewhere between naming and kind of pointing to its style. So it's kind of less formal, less structured than naming, and trying to capture its essence. Beautiful. Thank you. Next up is Elena, Evanique, and Joe. Elena.
Yes, thank you, Shrikant. Another thing that I want to share from, it was very interesting to read the translation in another language, is that the very first, the beginning of the poem, it says that the Tao was created out of chaos. That's another thing that's very unique to that particular translation. And that's, so what was before, what was there, what was the first, what was the beginning, what was right there when there was nothing. That's something that brings up a lot to me. And then, yeah, it was just striking to read all this and hear everyone.
Elena, you're going in and out.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So it was just striking to hear everyone else's reflections and interpretations, because if it adds to it, we get pieces and put it together to create something new, in fact, with Jason and everyone else reading in different languages and versions of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Next up is Evanique, Joe, and Douglas. Evanique.
Yeah, one of the things I first noticed is that it starts with, it feels to me like chaos, the way I see it, like starts with chaos, and then just read a little bit. Before heaven and earth were born, there was something indescribable. So when I heard that, I was like, okay, so that's kind of like the creation story where we're doing in the Jordan Peterson series, where chaos out of nothing, it's formless, it's not named. And then he's like, I just call it the Tao, but if I had to, I would call it great. And then it goes through a sequence of what is great. Just saying, what was it? I'm sorry, I just lost my place. But it starts going through how everything is great. The earth, the humans are also great. So it's like everything that's created out of this chaos is great. And he's like, humans are also great, which I think the emphasis on the word also is something, because I think we forget that as human beings, we were created out of this chaos, which was great, that was indescribable. So in a sense, human beings are indescribable. I also noticed the flow is, in some translations talks about human beings being the children of the earth. So it's like one is born out of the other. So it's this whole birth thing, which goes back to chaos and order, and is like, you know, the description of it being the mother of the universe. So it's like this creative, like everything comes out of this creation is great. And that was just moving, because I think if we saw that in our society, like if we really saw each other as great, I think we would begin to understand how this was all coming to be. And I think that's what Lao Tzu was trying to say, like, this is how we were born, like, this is the greatness, it was his attempt at explaining how we were created out of this chaos. But he said he fully owns that he can't describe it. So those were my thoughts.
Wonderful. Thank you, Evanique. I particularly like the point about placing of humans. in scheme of nature. And that's what I love about this. It places where what humans are, also saying that, humans are also great. I think that's key. And I also like the intermediate things about heaven and earth. So the four things. Next up is Joe, followed by Douglas. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea,
Joe, let me interrupt for a second.
Sure.
Jason, did you want to comment on something?
Oh no! That just quickly. I thank you, Evan Nick. I think you capture a lot of good thing I didn't notice. For example, I think the whole subject. Okay, after I heard your explanation, it's like, how are we created, right? How are we human get created? And then I almost forget, in Chinese, the Lao Tzu also use two also. Human also. So it kind of reminds us, talk about nature, don't forget about we also create from this way. So thank you. I think that's a very good reminder, So thank you.
Yeah, no, that was great. I mean, it's kind of microcosm and macrocosm idea that, you have nature in you, and that is as sacred as nature itself. Thank you. Joe, sorry about the interruption. Please.
Oh, no, that was excellent. Thank you. And so I really like this poem this verse, primarily because it talks about the birth of the universe. So once you understand the universe, you start to understand there's something bigger than yourself. And then you start to examine yourself and how you fit within that context. And what you're doing is, in that process, is you're looking inward. And when you start to see how you fit in to the bigger picture, you reevaluate your roles and your actions and what nature is. And once you start to look inward, you start to notice things. So when I look at the last verse, thus to know humanity, understand earth, to know earth, understand heaven. You're doing this by, you're starting to notice things by looking inward in that process, but you're still finding your place in nature itself during this process. So what else are you doing in this process? You're learning to trust yourself as well. And it talks about that a little bit, in this sense that you start to actually see what your belief systems are. And then how do you challenge those belief systems that you have, because you're looking inward. So I think this is like kind of a really interesting way of showing us how we fit into the external from looking at internal. That's the key part about this verse for me, is that it really does call out what the Tao is all about. That's it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joe. I really like the point about internal and external. It kind of, I like that I like the way where he places humans and the Tao, and these two steps in between. So I really like that. Thank you. Next up is Douglas. Douglas, what did you get? Or what is your evaluation of number 25? You need to unmute yourself. Okay, Douglas, you need to unmute yourself. Okay, I'll go to Claudio. Claudio,
yeah, here I go. I'm here.
Yes,
I got unmute. Okay, sorry. That's like my teachers. It's like they said, Alan Watts, one of my teachers, and Fritz Perls, one of my teachers at Esalen Institute, would say, it's about everything is nothing and nothing is everything. So we get to the cosmos, and the cosmos is there, but we see what we want to see. Okay, so what we're seeing into the Tao, we're seeing what we want to see. It's like if we looked in a pool, the reflection that we wanted to see would be the Tao. Okay, everything there would have represent everything. So it's everything. What they would say, everything is nothing, and nothing is everything. So it brings it to a whole thing.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Claudio.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm not going to go in any particular order, just what from this randomly in the senses. Yes. So this Tao or this thing is apparently it's formless, without form, which for me indicates that it's infinite, because finite things have forms, right? So it doesn't. Finite things have boundaries. So this apparently doesn't have any boundaries. But at the same time, it's pervasive. It pervades everything, all matter, right? So that means that it exists inside heaven and earth, and inside the human beings, I guess, this Tao, and it exists outside it because it is infinite, right? And I guess heaven and earth are finite, right? So it's the mother of all things, which I guess it gives birth to heaven and earth and all matter. It's eternal. I believe this thing is eternal, the Tao. It's always existed because it's undergoing no change, which has, I guess it's the uncaused cause or first cause or unmoved mover, whose existence is not contingent on anything. And the fact that he calls it great, just great, although it probably deserves more words than that, I guess it gets to show you the limitation of language and the human mind, trying to describe something that's very profound and unprecedented, right? So, what can be greater than great? So this person believed that the greatest compliment could be the word great. And it looks like he's describing some kind of interconnectedness between, because he calls other things great, the Sage King, the earth is great, heaven is great, and the Tao is great. I guess is implying that there's an interconnectedness there, like everything emerged from the Tao, the mother. So like the hierarchical order that he describes here, man takes his law from earth, and then earth takes its law from heaven, heaven takes its law from Tao. There's a chain of kind of like causation that links everything together. So yeah, that's my interpretation. That's what I got from it.
Thank you. Next up is going to be David.
Yes, thanks. One comment, and I also have a question for Jason Amun. I mean, the comment is, again, for some of these longer passages, there definitely seems to be sort of an internal structure to them of 2 or 3. I mean, this introduction about chaos, forming what's the way, and then a transition. And as Jason and others have mentioned many times, this is somewhat like a political treatise or a advice to leaders or rulers. So I'm really curious about, notice this ending part where it's saying, for example, the Hendricks, the way is great, heaven is great, earth is great, and the king is also great. I mean, it seems very much to me like if I'm a ruler or a political leader reading this, that it's very, boosting of the ego. It's like, the way is great, this is all about the way, and you have all these other great things, and the ruler is amongst these great leaders. And so to really get the leader engaged in this, and then transitioning to this, man models on earth, earth to heaven, heaven to the way, and the way. So it seems to be in that those final lines about sort of, connecting the ruler or boosting the ruler's ego, and then sort of taking the ruler back to he's part of the way, how to to get the ruler engaged, and then to say, okay, we're all part of the way, and that one should be following the way to try to maybe encourage the ruler to follow the way. And as some of the other passages have said, of in the way that they rule the country, the way that they rule the world. So I just find interesting how that passage would be read by a leader, and how it's seeming to try to speak to that leader and to engage the leader. And my question for Jason is, he's mentioned a number of times very interestingly and appropriately, of trying to use consistent language throughout all these different passages in the Tao. But we've also talked about that this, in reality is probably written by many different people, at least a couple of the passages. And it's unclear, I mean, not a large period of time, but different periods. I mean, some possibly a range of time, a small range. So I'm curious about, I understand the reason to say we want to be very consistent in the language across these various stanzas, but I'm curious if there was enough change in the authors or the time period that it's really appropriate to say we have to to insist upon using the same symbol for the same word in each. I understand that consistency, but if it's different authors, likely were they intentionally trying to use the same, vocabulary? Trying to match the vocabulary where it really would be appropriate that way, or is it being too strict to say that this symbol means the same thing in every single one of these different stanzas?
Jason, go ahead.
Yes, yeah, thank you, David. I think you have two questions. Let me answer first one. I think I always I think the Dao De Jing, the whole Dao De Jing, they teach it as in this way. He talk about two subjects. One is the human, usually it's political, and another one is metaphysics or nature. So most of chapter, if you try to think back, most of chapter, probably all, it goes this way. Talk about the nature, universe, or the metaphysics, right? And then give you a lesson, and the lesson usually is political, So, and sometimes they only talk about the metaphysics and the nature and no lesson, just talk about that. So it's so they have these two kind of chapter if you pay attention on that. And this one on the chapter 25, I don't see the last one. They give Lao Tzu give you any political lesson or give you any lesson. They just pure describe what's going on. So the whole chapter is a description. There's no lesson here. That's why I don't see the translation used as a sage king, sovereign, king is right. I think they talk about man. So just like Emmerich talk about. So this one could be equivalent to Bible's Genesis, right? So how does the world and the human got created? And they, just like Emmerich point out, they put also, right? Man also great. So I think that's the lesson, and this one, it's not teaching you on the moral or on political, basically just describe how, just like seven is the seventh day, the sixth day, God created man and God is happy. I think that's in this sense. Now that's my own interpretation. And the second question David mentioned about the consistency of language. I do believe they have a different author, but at least the whole 81 chapter doesn't present, as many authors. They try to be presented as one author. Even we kind of guess they probably have multiple authors. So I think the language's consistency is important, because that's why I always, when I translate, I always make sure, they all in the same meaning. For example, I talk about 自然, the nature. I noticed in the whole 81 chapter, they appear 5 times. So I want to check all 5 times, make sure they all in the same meaning. If they are have to be in different meaning, they must have a reason. If I don't see the reason, I should keep them in the same meaning. That's why I insist. Last week, when most of the translation talk about the nature speak very few words. I say no, that's not right, because they call 自然, that's not nature. That means it's self-evidence. I don't have to speak too much. And same as today, they say 自然 again. And most of translation doesn't call it nature, they call it self-evident. So this kind of consistency, I try to match. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Amon, followed by Laura. Amon.
I want to to address David's question, and I also wanted to say I think Jason did a great job addressing it. I don't disagree with anything he said. I do think that there is a way of reading this chapter as a purely metaphysical exposition. But having said that, if it is the case that this is being read to the young princeling who is one day going to be a king, then it has a very different sort of tone. And there is almost a lesson that is implicit here, and it's only missing 2 words to actually make it really sort of evident. And that would be, after all that is read here, the words ho hum, because it talks about the 4 greats, how heaven is great, earth is great, the king is also great, almost like an afterthought. And then it goes on to say, you know, the king follows the way of earth, the earth follows the way of heaven. It places the king in the most subordinate of positions in this entire description. And at the time, why this could be important, choosing that term Wang was actually a title that was supposed to be only for a single king of China, but had been being adopted by lords throughout China at the time. They actually referred to them as Ba Wang, or false kings. And this was one of Confucius's main concerns when we talked about that rectification of names a few chapters back, was getting people to own the right title, the right name, the right word. Stop calling yourself king if you're not. If Lao Tzu was writing this, or the author was writing this with a young princeling in mind and laying out this lesson, you can almost picture them sitting under a starry sky at night talking, and the prince's self-importance just ebbing away with each and every line. Less ego stroking and more a where you belong in the place of the grand scheme of things. So like I said, not to disagree, but there are multiple ways of interpreting a chapter like this, and that is one of the fun things about reading into it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is going to be Laura, Margarita, Greg, Allison, Kevin, and Katie, followed by Judith. Laura, go ahead.
Okay, I sort of read this one in a very personal way. I thought it was very intimate in the way that it was written, not so much in this grand scale. And I think that it wound up saying that understanding the greatness within yourself, because it's always been talking about developing a self-dependency, you know, being an individual. And I think by sort of ending that with the greatness, you know, in yourself, that was really the quintessential message that he was always trying to tell us. And that's why I thought it was ever so powerful. You know, I left there feeling like, wow, yeah, that's it. You know, this is, and so that I just think the whole thing led up to that, and it just kept building inside of me, you know, and I could feel the power at the end of it coming into myself. So that's my take on it.
Wonderful.
Which is
Thank you.
Everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Next up is Margarita, followed by Greg. Margarita.
Yes, thank you, Srikant. I think reading this passage is interesting because it kind of directs us to try to answer this big question where we came from. And reading this passage, even though they're meant translation, but we kind of bring a little piece of ourselves into understanding where we came from. I can't stop being a Christian. I start to think this is so related with Genesis. Even when I Googled this morning, I realized there are several Christian interpretation on Dao De Jing. But in this pursuit of understanding where I came from, I have this question. So is it coming from chaos or coming from Jason said it's nebula. In Bahasa Indonesia, it was said samar. Samar means unformed, abstract. So I kind of wonder what is the best interpretation? I understand I won't say it's best nebula, because it's I want to know whether and what is the context about 2,500 years ago to say this thing where human came from. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Margareta. Would either Amon or Jason like to comment on that?
I can comment on that, and I can show you the words. Okay, so just answer specifically your questions. That's why. Okay, so the words is here. If you see these two words, okay, that's called 有物混成. Okay, that's why I translate as something like nebula. Okay, let me explain word by word, and you probably can tell me what would be the best translation. I think you talk about Sama, or like Evanik talk about out of chaos. They all make sense because 有物, the first two words, means something. Okay, there's something. Okay, then these words 混 means mix up, like blur water or something makes not clear. And 成 means something has a form. So they talk about something like a form, but not really a form and not very clear. So if you have the image on that, okay, in the modern man, you probably think about, or scientific person, they may think, okay, that's nebula because you're talking about the beginning of the universe. But like Evanik talk about like out of chaos, that probably very biblical scene, right? The God like fiat lux, right? That there will be light. Okay, everything fiat lux. Okay, this kind of concept. So it really have some cultural background or religious background. Really depend where are you coming from. That's my explanation. If you want to know word by word, that's these four words. Okay.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Greg, Allison, Kevin, Katie, and Judith. Greg.
Well, this is actually a very good time for me to put my comment in. Mathematicians talk about chaos differently. It comes between randomness and order. So chaos is like stirred up. You can't automatically see it, but the information is in there. So at the beginning of the universe, there was a chaos, a nebula, as Jason says, all stirred up. But where did that information come from? Does it come from a universe before, or a multiverse, or something like that? And somehow these sages knew that. We are ordered, we're DNA, and we have a very specific, you can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again, but Humpty Dumpty has an order, right? And when he's crashed, he's in chaos. But the order is still there. You can time reverse it and get it back.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Next up is Allison, followed by Kevin. Allison.
I liked how they were kind of comparing motherhood to the Tao. And as a mother, I thought that was pretty cool, and I like that. But what I also was really struck by, like I was thinking about what Evanik said about the idea of Genesis and the creation. And what I think is what really struck me is that this is so incredibly old. And what I think is just amazing is that 2,500 years ago, you had so many different parts of the world where they were not in contact at all, or there was very little contact because they didn't have airplanes. You could only go so far when you had to walk or row your boat. So, but what's amazing is in so many completely different parts of the world, they had similar ideas, and they had similar ideas about the creation of the world. And it's kind of astounding. How did they come up with the same idea in all these different places? I don't know. I mean, that was the thing I was really struck by.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Kevin, followed by Katie. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. I got a 3 point here. First one is about the four great thing. One for me, my translation is word to word. First is human, ground, we translate earth, sky. The third is Tao. Fourth is still like nature. So if we base this structure, the human is on the bottom end. Then this came from a ground. Then the ground from the sky from Tao. Tao from nature. Why you like nature? This is here slightly different. Understand different. The nature, have different meaning. Every meaning can explain here. Stay here. For example, we compare nature versus nurture. So as human being, we normally nurture the laws after born, right? Then also we got one idiom called follow nature law, like for and another third one you call nature versus culture. Another you see culture is from human being behavior mostly, basically our living and historical hierarchy, heritage. And in the Tao, the first one, Wu Wei is nature, no action. No action, we back to follow nature like water flow. And another point, I guess from Christian, one word can pick up your something is called Trinity. Christian God had like Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. In Chinese tradition, we got three also: sky, ground, human. That's we normally we in ordinary human being, people talk to each other. We talk about that too. So I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great observations, Kevin. We'll pick up on this, after everybody has gotten a chance to, talk about their, kind of their overall impressions. Next up is going to be Katie, Judith, Shane Murray, Madeline, and Brian. Katie.
I was originally going to say what Jason was saying about that it was more about, and I'm going to add on to this while commenting on Jason, that it's more about the metaphysical, because it says follows the laws in Derek Lynn's translation, and in the other ones it's more follows. I think I don't like the use of the word follows ultimately. I looked up like synonyms for follows, and I was like, if it was something more like physically goes along with, or like some other word, I think like follows for me, that's where I'm getting the feeling of power, like, as opposed to like, gravitates along, or, some word that might feel more metaphysical. I don't really like the word follows. And also like that also kind of, it was more hierarchical. I was thinking before of Chi as kind of like a life force that like pervades all things. So that for me was kind of like conflicted a little bit with that belief of like, kind of a hierarchical, this follows this, follows this, follows this. So that's my point.
Excellent observation. Jason.
Thank you, Katie. I think that you are right. Okay, I should not call it a follow. It gives you a wrong sense. I think going along probably make more sense. Okay, so let me show you exactly. I also find out this is interesting. Okay, this thing is interesting. Just 1 minute. Let me show the screen here. Just 1 minute. Okay. Okay, the last sentence when you talk about, if you notice this word, this word, okay, that means people, men follow the earth, okay, or go along with earth. Earth go along with sky, sky go along with Tao, Tao go along by itself, okay. These words, okay, these words, I just do a search, okay, in Dao De Jing only happen 5 times, okay. And the other one is on chapter 57, which is talking about law. Okay, talk about the law. So, but this one is different. This word is very interesting because in Chinese it could call law. Okay, okay, that's why I translate as follow. But another interesting way is in Buddhism, Dharma. Okay, we also translate with this word. Okay, so that means something description or also prescription. So something it happened naturally. So thank you, Katie. I think follow probably sounds too prescription. Like I give you a command, you should follow this one. But is the proper translation should be something like going naturally this way, not like I have to do this way. Unless you want translate as this one, man, instead of using man, you use sovereign or use king. Okay, so that becomes a political sense. That's a different story. But thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Next up is Judith.
Okay, I have two comments and I want to really address what we were just talking about, but first I'll go back to the nebula. I like the word nebula because from a nebula, stars are born. When stars explode, they form nebulas again. So, and then more stars are born. So it's that cyclical nature. And that's exactly what it says here. It says, and returns to the origin of all things. So I think it's a fantastic word, very appropriate. Now this hierarchy thing, that's exactly the word I wanted to use that word exactly too. I resolved this myself in this way. In my version, it says the Tao is great, the universe is great, Earth is great, man is great. These are the four great powers. There isn't any greater or greatest, nothing like that. Then we get thrown off a little bit when it says man follows the earth follows the universe. So then we think like, oh, so man's at the bottom. But I don't think of it that way. I think already it's been set that that it flows through all things inside and out and returns to the origin of all things. And I think it's our human nature to feel uncomfortable by that, but that's what the world is. Children follow parents, societies follow their leaders. That doesn't mean the leader is greater. And that's probably what was intended to say. It's not that the leader is not greater. You all have the Tao. You are all made of the same thing. Everything is great, but there is a kind of an order that naturally happens. And so that it seems that one follows another. Maybe we'll find a word we like better, but one follows another doesn't mean one is better than another or there's a hierarchy per se, just a natural order of with all having flow and all returning to the same thing, all having the Tao inside and out. So I'm not really bothered by that.
Thank you, Judith. Next up is Shane Murray, followed by Madeline. Shane Murray.
Thank you. And I apologize if this is too specific. I just realized we're still talking about overview, but the one thing that stood out to me is this notion that the Tao travels far away from itself by extension or by creation, and it returns to itself. And to me, it seems if we could understand that means of return, if we could understand the depth of what that's saying, we might then understand how to return to ourselves, because I think we're very commonly at a great distance from ourselves. And so to me, there's something very meaty there. I don't know how you arrive at it, but if we could, I think we could begin to understand how to return to ourselves. Thank you.
Wonderful, great observation. I think that's one of the gems in this. Thank you. Next up is Madeline, followed by Brian. Madeline.
Oh, yes, it was lovely to hear it read in so many different languages. Thank you, everyone. What Shane Marie was just saying, wasn't there an earlier chapter, something about the return contains the journey, or the journey is you're back at the beginning when you arrive at your destination? I think that was in an earlier chapter. Anyway, my question had been the word vague or nebula. How I feel kind of vague and nebulous about it. How would it be used in context, just in some regular sentences? Like, would it would be used for cloudy water, or for things mixing together, or for? Okay, so that's my question.
Jason, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, I think you are right. That's called in. Okay, I talk about it in the original text. The words called hun. Okay, that means mix, like a muddy water. When the water is muddy, you call hun, and also use not most of the time used in the negative sense. If somebody is buster, okay, that's a kind of curse that you call the hun dan, okay, the egg, okay, so it's kind of a curse, okay, so it's not at least in the Confucius teaching, it's not a positive word, but in Taoism they use this one as like murky, not clear, something like this, which is good or original. So
thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Charlie. Brian.
The one thing a couple of things occur to me, that first of all, the Tao seems to be, in this, for Taoism, it's the answer to the ultimate question. You don't ask questions beyond the Tao. The Tao is the last and final ultimate answer. So in that way, it's kind of like in the West with God. You don't ask about God. It's the who. You don't ask the who, what, when, where, how, why of behind God, or the cosmogony of God. And so you don't do that for the Tao either. The one thing I think that's been added in the West that I'm familiar with is that there's another entity that you do not ask questions beyond, and that is the individual. And that came up with, historically, I think that's a correct statement. It came up with Descartes, when Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." He was looking for, just as the Tao is not only the answer to the ultimate question, it provides certainty. And it says that in this poem. Also, for the West, God provides certainty. God is certainly there. The ultimate answer is there, and is certainly there. And that's exactly what Descartes is saying. Of all the things that I have experienced and sensed and thought about, the only thing I can be certain about is that I exist. And I can be certain that I exist because I think. So I think there's a second center in the Western, a second ultimate answer, which is the individual, which at least, I don't know, I don't want to generalize about the East, but in the Tao, I don't see anything where the individual is presented as an ultimate answer. So that brings me back to this question I've kind of kept in the back of my mind. My impression from the West is that there's two centers that are encountering each other. You see it in the hero quest and understanding of perception and cognition, all these things. It's the nature and individual, the cosmos and the individual, two centers. And in the Tao, I think they're coming from one place, the individual and the Tao. And I think that's reinforced by this poem. And one thing that means is that in the West, you achieve, and other people have touched on this, you achieve power by thinking and knowing. The individual as a center can know and harness the power of this nature, which is external to him, by thinking about it. And that's the subtitle of Descartes' thesis. It's the method of scientific investigation. It's usually shortened to the method, but there's a certain way that the West then sees itself as separate, apart from nature, and in viewing itself that way has derived a way of investigating nature, the scientific method, which gives it a certain kind of power. But there is a power also in the Tao, and it's not, or the Taoist view of human nature, and it's not based on knowing. It's just that you have it, you're a part of it.
Thank you, Brian. Amon, would you like to comment on this? Amon and then Jason?
Sorry, I was trying to break out the etymology for fa, which seemed to be a little contentious, this idea of a dictation or a prescription being put here. As easy as it would be to say follow, you could say take the lead, but I think to myself, when it comes to this sort of hierarchy or this brute fact of the Tao, I do agree with Brian that that is present in the thinking. As to what that commands of people or demands of people, it's almost the question, chicken or egg, which came first, the star or the nebula, which follows from the other. And on a long enough timeline, each follows from the other continuously. There isn't a hierarchy as much as there is a cycle. I don't think Descartes' cogno eram sanctum would be as absolute to Taoist thinking. I think Chuang-Tzu kind of refutes it with his infamous butterfly story. But I do think that a value of the individual experience is understood as true to Taoist thought.
Thank you, Amon. Next up is Jason.
Thank you, Brian. I think you raised a very interesting question because I just recently I think about this a lot. You talk about the, just to reflect, you talk about the Tao would be the equivalent to the Western sense as God, you don't ask. And then individualism, I believe what you are talking about is individualism. It's also another thing, or individual, it's not, it seems like you don't ask about this and you don't see the Taoism has an individualism concept here. And you mentioned about the Descartes, Cacito ergo sum, okay, as individualism. And I agree with this concept. I kind of think about Descartes is the starting of the Western individualism because he focused on what I'm thinking, right? There's nobody can interfere. So interestingly, in Chinese culture, I don't see any individualism come out, okay, except in about like 400 CE, so-called Neo-Taoism, okay, they related to Tao. I think, in my opinion, is individualism. But in the general Chinese culture, consider this one as revolt, okay, never take serious on that. And then that's only appear in the period of time. If you are interested, if you look at the Neo-Taoism or look at the so-called the 7 sages in the Bamboo Grove, okay, so that's the people who kind of like, you know, do whatever I want to do, you know, kind of, you know, use your own, you know, consider self, but not in the selfish way, okay, more metaphysical and philosophical way. So, you know, so I think you raise a very interesting question, and I don't have an answer, but I think about this a lot.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Brian and Amon. We'll now go to Charlie. Charlie, go ahead.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to speak for this particular session because I was kind of surprised by the 25th poem. Because I had the impression that Taoism did not have a cosmology, and so that it was focused on staying present You know, that was, you know, that the Tao was to be part of the Tao, was to be present. And so the idea of stepping outside of the Tao and looking at something like this. But anyway, when the discussion happened about the word follow, my Buddhist background kind of kicked in, and I thought, well, maybe what was one way to interpret that word would be to unfold from. So that was like in Buddhism, we have this idea of dependent origination, and so that what is happening, or the ultimate reality, is emptiness. But within that emptiness, you have this unfolding of things that happen, and so that, in a sense, it would be like, you know, the Earth is first. Well, you can think of it as a hologram. So you like you're turning like a diamond around, and you're looking at it from different points of view, but it's like a holistic thing. But you know, if you look at it from one direction, something that unfolds from the Earth would unfold life, which would include, you know, humans, and so it's kind of like you have these causes and conditions, which would be, you know, the chaos would be from within. Chaos is everything, all potential. If you think of chaos as being the potential of all. And then from that, you know, comes the heaven and the earth and humans. That is kind of like an unfolding. But I don't know. For me, I was confused, to be honest. I didn't feel I really understood this one, so I wasn't intending to. But this follow thing kind of clicked my mind. Says, well, maybe there would be this way of looking at it.
Thank you, Charlie. Next up is Amon.
I thank you. I wanted to respond to Charlie, what you were just saying, because the Buddhism and Taoism have a relationship of thousands of years in China, and it really was almost hinged around this idea of emptiness. Nagarjuna's took this idea of dependent origination and developed the idea of emptiness that became foundational to Chan Buddhism, which later develops into Zen Buddhism, which is the form of Buddhism that really took in China. And it was in no small part because this idea of emptiness was something that Taoists could really gel well with those Buddhists. My Sipo always used to joke, you know, it took about 300 years before the Taoists realized this wasn't just foreign Taoism, it was something entirely actually different. But that term Fa in Chinese for Buddhism actually is almost directly translated as Dharma. And so it less connects directly with independent origination and more with this idea of Dharma or duty or law, but there's not a lot of air between those concepts necessarily, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Amon. Next, what I would like to do is I would like to look at the four greatnesses. Okay, I would like to do a discussion on four greatnesses: the Tao, the heaven, earth, and humans. He calls all four great, and he talks about a relationship between them. So the question is, what are each of these? And what is the relationship between them? And what does he mean by follows? How do you see the relationship between these four things: the Tao, heaven, earth, and human? So if you'd like to discuss that, go ahead. I'm going to start with Amon and Jason, if they would like to comment, and then I'll open it up for everybody else. Amon, what do you see? What does he mean by heaven and earth here? Because he talks a lot about Tao and he talks a little bit about human. And what does he mean by all these four things and the relationship?
I would defer to Jason's way of translating heaven and earth as everything. That is just all that is heaven and earth comprises everything. So when he says, you know, what is great, the Tao is great, heaven is great, earth is great, man is great, it's saying everything, really. That everything without exception is great. And therefore, if everything is this special, then none of it is extra special. None of it is, supersedes any other. You need to just simply recognize its greatness as it is in its manifestation for as long as it is there to be recognized. And that too will be temporary.
What does he mean that earth follows heaven and heaven follows Tao? Why that sequence?
If you were to think of this almost like a dharma, earth follows heaven in a very concrete sense. What happens in the heavens comprises the earth. The rainy season, the sunny season, winter, spring. So the earth is compelled to only follow the lead of where heaven goes, and heaven moves through these cycles as they go. Heaven follows the Tao. The Tao is a more amorphous way than can be understood, but we get the best understanding of it by seeing how the heavens behave. And man follows earth because just like the earth is dragged along in the wake of heaven's manifestations, man is dragged along in the wake of earth's manifestations, and there's no denying that. You can be a king but not in a flash flood. Then you are just another human swimming.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. Jason, what does he mean by earth and heaven? And what does he mean by earth follows heaven and heaven follows the Tao?
I think in the early time when Amon and I worked on this one, he suggests me don't use heaven, use sky. And I disagree at the time. And right now, more and more, I think we probably should not use the word heaven, okay? Because through this meetup, I understand a lot of people, and most of translation call it heaven. And most of English reader have the religious sense on that. Because when we read the words heaven, and then immediately we have a God, paradise, this kind of thing. But I just have to say there's no. But if sky is also a wrong word, because sky is too scientific, too physical word. So I plan to run a section regarding the Chinese heaven, because I find some paper about this one, because this one is not divine, not godly, but also not the nature sky. Okay, so that's the first thing I'd like to mention. Second, I always say when we say heaven and earth, okay, this is called Tian Di. Okay, I always direct translate to the word, which means the nature world. That means the world. Okay, the ontological world. Okay, put this way. And if they call the Tian Xia, which is mean under the heaven or under the sky, that's also translated as a world, but that means the political world. That means the world with people governing civilization. So I think that's very important, because that's different sense. Even we all translate as a word. And then your question about like why the men have followed the earth follow the heaven follow Tao. Okay. The word follow, okay, I will suggest look at the chapter 16, okay? Yeah, chapter 16, talk about some law unchanging. And I think Judy also made something return, okay? And in the chapter 16, they say everything will return, same as this one. So why men have followed the earth follow the heaven follow Tao. Okay, follow may not be the right word, but we will say they have a natural law which is consistent. Okay, so basics by the same natural law which is unchanging, consistent from A to B, B to C, C to D, all in the same law, like Newton's law. Okay, that's what be my interpretation. I think this one you can read with chapter 16 together. Basically, talking about the law, which is chapter 16. This one, chapter 25, talking about the world. How does the world create? Then also mention the law. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. So now, so the question is, what does he mean by Tao heaven, earth, and human, and what relationship does he see between them? So next up is Evanik, followed by Joe. Evanik.
Yeah, so what I see is a hierarchy in a sense. And what I see is that it starts with Tao, heaven, earth, and human. So it's like a top down. But I was reading another translation, and it says in the first part, in the beginning, before the universe existed, everything was formless and void. Peace, emptiness, oneness, changeless, eternal presence. This is the source of all things. And when I thought about that, so when I think about the Tao, I still think of chaos, but I also think that's the source of everything else. So it's the source of heaven, it's the source of earth, it's the source of human. I love Jason's explanation of heaven. So I do like that. And I think when he says heaven and earth is everything, I agree in that it's not, I think Western world, we look at heaven as above and then earth is kind of below, but I see it as the same. It's all part of this like massive universe that we're a part of that we don't even know. So to me, I look at it like for us, it's everything, but in a sense, it's just part of this larger universe. And humans, I think other people have spoken on that where they talk about, you know, I mean, humans, we're trying to find who we are in this and our role in this. And I think we have to go inward. And when we go inward, we realize we're connected to the source. So it's kind of like we're the children of the source, or that's how we connect. Like that's, it comes from there. So I think of that hierarchy, and I think the relationship is one supports the other, and that we're all connected, and that when you go in, and I forget who said it, so I apologize, but somebody said when you go inward, that's when you connect to everything. So I think connecting to the heaven and the earth, and that's why when you go out in nature, you feel like you're connected to everything. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, Amon, Jason, and Avanika, all three of you, there is, I am really, this is definitely my favorite. And the structure I see is on one hand, what all three of you pointed out is that heaven and earth together is everything. So I see actually two axes. There is heaven and earth axis, like a horizontal axis. There's a yin yang axis that is going between the two. And then I see a separate axis, which is the Tao and human axis. This is referring to what you had said earlier about kind of macrocosm and microcosm, like human and Tao. Tao is like everything in nature, and human is also like totality. And then your dance, and there is this separate axis, which is another way of capturing the whole. So I see it as this kind of, as a cross. So there is earth and heaven and earth on yin and yang on this side, and then kind of nature and human on the on kind of this vertical side. So next up is Kevin, followed by Joe and Judith. Kevin.
Yeah, I guess Sreka, you missed one off from me question. I'm going to quickly answer like Brian said. There's you like a God, you cannot ask question. Actually, from the chapter first, right? Though is not eternal, though named cannot eternal name. We know that part. Also, this chapter specifically said, if you let me have to name it, I called though, or let's see, I'll name again, I called the great. So for me, that's I kind of see the author the humble feeling. So humble, let's see, talk about it, learn it. We know we can, let's see, from can get all, but we intention to learn it. For me, the follow word from this angle, we could learn. Let's see, human learn from the earth or ground, then the ground learn from the sky or heaven. Then Tao learn, then sky learn from the the Dao learned from the 自然,
Mhm.
nature, which means. Then here also, I would see, like your figure, let's see, sky, human in the middle, then the ground. Then you all follow Dao, which if you even use, same thing actually. That's just our language itself. If you use the Jason way, it follows its own ways. It works own ways. However, we can think, let's see, a modern practice, our human can create everything. We can create sky, create ground. We can create old rules. We can make it chaos. Like so our own world is losing imagination. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. In one of the translations used the term patterns after. I think that's a very good way of, I find it to be a useful way of thinking about, kind of humans pattern after Earth or patterns after. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Judith and Dave. Joe.
Yeah, so that was pretty much the only substantive thing I was going to say was patterns. I mean, so that the Tao I look at as essentially giving its wisdom. And in that wisdom, you start to see the patterns in nature, and so you have an understanding of how to live through nature. And yeah, I don't look at it as if you're using the heavens per se. I look at it as the universe. So if you replace the heavens with the universe, just for the reasons that Jason's had stated, you can even see patterns in the universe itself as well. And so then you have the earth and how that impacts man, or human beings and humanity. And essentially, this is what I was kind of trying to get to before, is that once you start to look internally, that process gets reversed, because you start to see, okay, I'm noticing myself. I'm part of a bigger system. I'm part of the earth. The earth is part of the universe. The universe is the Tao. And this is all, and these patterns that I'm recognizing and learning to live through nature in that process is, that's where you go internal to external. And that's, and you can go the inverse. And that's why I think this poem is or verse, I'm sorry, is so important, is because if you just the way we laid it out, if you do the inverse, it actually works. So you can think about it in that term. And the Tao is ultimately how to live, which is wisdom. Right. And that's their patterns.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for elaborating the patterns. Appreciate that. Next up is Judith, followed by Dave and Madeline. Judith.
Yeah, my translation actually does use the word universe, which I liked. So I didn't have the word heavens to deal with at all. And if I had, I think I would have just thought of it as universe. I liked Evanique term, like children. I like that way of thinking of it as children, because that's kind of what I was trying to say before, is the way I see that follows that you were asking, Shrikant. It's like, the universe made of, atom, hydrogen, helium, explosions make new atoms, carbon, things like that. That's what we're made of. That's what we're all made of. So we follow, the earth wouldn't exist if it weren't for a star. We wouldn't exist if the earth were not here. So in that sense, we are following, but in another sense, not in another sense or whatever, we are the Tao. It's within all of that. It's just, it's just transformations. However, we follow the other. It's sort of like saying, again, like I'm not, my parents aren't more important than me because I was given birth by them, and I'm not more important than my children because I gave birth to them. So that's the way I think of the universe, giving birth to the earth, giving birth to us. There isn't a hierarchy in my mind. It's like, that's why that everything is great is there. And yet we do follow from each other. So that's how I interpret the follow.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Judith. I also want to say, I really like Amon's way of putting it, of describing actually just the physical earth, the way in which it is shaped by the sky, and how humans kind of live on the earth. So are kind of shaped by that. So each of them has their own nature, and kind of respecting that, understanding that, and understanding the relationships between them. Thank you. Next up is going to be Dave, Madeline, and Claudio. Dave.
Yeah, thanks, Shrikant. And I will agree mostly with Evanique that it's a hierarchy, but I've got a problem at the very last line with the word among. Obviously, the way is great, heaven is great, earth is great. So, the way is perfect, heaven's almost as good, and earth is lower. And this, as Amon said, is you might say the Machiavellian translation, because it mentions king in lieu of man. Anyway, the king is also great. But the last line, in the country there are 4 greats, and the king occupies one place among them. And that just kind of struck a chord. I'm an old guy that speaks English more or less, but to me, among means in the middle of. And sure enough, I pulled out my old college dictionary, and that's the first definition, is in the middle of. Now, the second or third talks about in a group, but like I said, I'm kind of being picky here, but I wonder, because we don't put man in the middle of that hierarchy. So I don't know if anyone else would comment on that, but it just struck me the wrong way, or just curious anyway.
Thank you. Next up is Madeline, Claudio, and Shane Murray. Madeline.
Yes, I'm thinking about the discussion about sky or heaven. The sky that I think of in the Tao, it's not the daytime sky that we see around us in our regular world. If you've ever been out in the country and you've been in a place where it is extremely dark and there have been many stars, we've all grown up with clocks around us, and those clocks keep the same pace of time no matter where we go. Whereas in the pre-clock era, there were clocks everywhere, but they were natural clocks, and they ran at different rates. So the clocks in the heavens, up in the sky, there would be the big seasonal change, the nightly changes of the stars. There would be the big seasonal changes of the stars. There were the patterns of the moon. So these were big, far away, unknowable natural laws. And the seasons of the earth followed those. There were planting seasons, there were harvesting seasons, flood seasons, warmer, cooler, all of those things. So followed, the sense I got from this was from what Jason said, following a law, and Aman said about Dharma, was the sense of following a natural law. That the rhythms and times of the earth follow the larger ones, different time scales of the heavens, and that people's rhythms and time scales follow those of the earth.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Jason, you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I think before Judy, I think I just lost who spoke about is who speak before Judy?
Joe.
Joe, can you repeat what they talk about the 4 great? It's inside some country?
Wait a minute.
Joe? Wait a minute. Who
I did speak for Madeline, but I didn't say that. That's Dave.
Oh, Dave, yeah.
Yeah.
you talk about like inside a country or for the four greatness, your translation?
Get unmuted here. Yeah, yeah, there's a footnote in my translation that the standard text in line 16 has in the realm.
In the realm, okay.
Yu Chung, where the Mawa Tui texts have in the country or state, Ku Chung.
Okay, I think I got it. Yeah. So I think thank you for reminding this, because I probably know it too early, so I just lightly translate as there are four things, right? Actually, the interest part, thank you for reminding. That's why sometimes, you know, foreigner would remind me a lot, because I read it and then I just take easy. But actually, I take a close look. They use the word kind of like a country, domain, realm. They said in this domain, okay, they have four greatness. Okay, he doesn't specify like this domain or it's a country or city or what. I think that he means any domain. Okay, so that means like anything. Okay, let's say in this meetup group, that's a domain, right? That's a realm. Okay, so in every realm, they have four important things. Okay, Tao, heaven, earth, and the people. Okay, so it makes perfect sense, and I almost forget how important of this one, because if you go to any like legalism talking, stratagem, you know, or play chess, play Go, people all talk about this four things, any domain. Okay, so first is Tao, which is unchanging, changing rule. Then we always talk about the heaven. Heaven doesn't mean God. That means something like weather, or you know, the timing usually means timing. Okay, and the earth usually means the situation you are in. For example, play soccer. You will talk about the weather, and that's a Tian, that's a heaven. You talk about the location, okay, which field, that's the earth, okay, and the people. So in every field, you will see Tao. So in Confucius, they also talk about Tao. In legalism, talk about Tao. In Taoism, talk about Tao. Even like if you read in Zhuangzi, which is Taoism, they even say like the gangster, okay, the robber, they also have their own Tao. Okay, so do everything, any domain, any realm, okay, they have Tao and heaven, which is timing, and the situation, which is earth, and the people. These four things have to match, then you can work on that. So I think that's very important. I didn't notice, I didn't catch this one. I just lightly translate. They all are, but you know, actually that means something.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Jason. I want to ask a follow-up question to Amon and Jason. Is there a parallel between earth and heaven on one hand, and yin and yang on the other, or are they completely different concepts? And what are the relationships between the pair, earth and heaven, or ground and sky?
They are considered very quintessential yin and yang. If you look at an old Chinese coin, for example, the old like circle with the square in the center of it, that is a representation of Tiandi, of heaven and earth. The heaven is thought to be the round and the earth a square, and humans reflect that with square-ish feet and roundish heads, and all of it is very much another manifestation of the relative yin-yang of the universe. But yes, heaven and earth are as quintessential yin-yang as fire and water or any other match set.
Then one more follow-up on that. I Ching is full of yin-yang, whereas Dao De Jing, yin-yang is only one of the parts. They talk a lot about the Tao and the human, relatively. That's my impression. Is that a fair impression, that I Ching is dominated by this interplay between yin-yang, whereas Dao De Jing has a significant place for Tao and human?
Let me answer this question. Dao De Jing, okay, only talk about yin yang once, okay?
Yes.
Okay, but that means that's not important because yin yang has precede, okay, over there. So all Chinese thinking have yin yang, but you don't have to say it, okay? So that's why you only say it once. Doesn't mean they don't have it, but it's running on the background. That's the first thing. And second thing, you ask a very Western question, okay? Heaven and earth fighting, okay? My answer is no, okay? Okay, yin and yang, heaven, earth, I think in the Western philosophy, okay, the first question we will ask, what's the boundary between heaven and earth? What's the boundary between yin and the yang? But Chinese don't think this way. Chinese ask question. They never ask question, what's the boundary? Only ask the question, what is yin, what is yang? But forget about the boundary. They always blur, mix, harmony together. So that make the Eastern and the Western philosophy very different. So yeah.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Jason, and thank you. Aman, go ahead.
Jason's right. It runs in the subtext of everything. I think I once mentioned that the very title Dao De Jing could be roughly retranslated as yin yang jing, because Tao is more yin, Da is more yang. And so it's just understood that there are yin and yang at work almost all the time.
Wonderful.
Have a great night, all.
Thank you, Aman. Always wonderful to have you here. Thanks. Next up is Claudio, Shane Murray, and Elena. Claudio.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the author appears to be describing some kind of order, both in regards to greatness or size and the order of maybe perhaps existence. For example, Tao would be it's infinite, right? I guess, right? It's larger than heaven, then earth, and then you have man, the smallest entity of the four, right? And then, well, the Tao is eternal, so it pre-existed heaven and earth pre-existed man, I guess. So there's also seems to be like an order, an interdependence, like the Tao must follow its own, follows its own nature itself, because it's not contingent on anything in order to keep its sustenance. And then you have heaven, which must follow the physical and natural laws of the Tao. I'm thinking that's what he's thinking, the laws maybe, in order to bring about earth. If it violates the Tao, the laws of the Tao, then perhaps earth would not come into existence, or it would, it might get destroyed, or I don't know. Then earth must follow the laws of heaven in order to form man or to bring him into existence. I don't know, it's very difficult to put yourself in the mindset, a modern, into the mindset of an ancient. I'm not sure how they were thinking back then, but that's how I see it.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Shane Murray, Elena, and Charlie. Shane Murray.
Yes, hi. I was just thinking maybe in terms of following, and I think this has been expressed, but perhaps it means that which gives the most immediate guidance and provision to that below it, and that to which we seek to harmonize with. So I think that relationship is much more obvious between humans and earth, that provision and guidance that's there. But when we think perhaps about Earth, which is a planet, if it's a living, breathing entity or conscious entity of any kind of sort, then it would certainly need to look to something similar but broader, which would be the context of the universe. And then the universe in its totality would need something beyond that, which would be the Tao, I would think. So we need, each thing needs something beyond to look to as an ideal, but not so far beyond that it's totally incomprehensible and not something from which you can learn.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Shanmari. Next up is Elena, Charlie, Kevin, and Brian. Elena.
Yes, and I will be speaking right next to the microphone. And it already was picked up by Madeline and a couple of other participants. So basically, time is one of the real dimensions relate to each other in this particular system. So time is a necessary factor, and that creates this glue of what it is of everything. And I'm going to bring up a question. If we have time, please do answer.
We're just looking at the relationship between these four, so you can ask any question about that.
Okay, great, and it's related to the four, to the system of four. The energy is supposed to be moving forwards and backwards. Energy doesn't stop; it doesn't stagnate. And once we create a condition for the energy to stay still, the energy transforms. And that's, I got it from Dao De Jing. If anyone is a physicist, mathematician, and such, what do you think about it? Like, how do you see it? And everyone else, I would really appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie, what do you think about these four greatnesses and their relations?
It's very coincidental that my lead up was from Elena asking about mathematicians and physicists, because that was what I wanted to talk about. A long time ago, back in the 90s, I had this kind of, I don't know if you call it epiphany, but it was just kind of like I had a sudden idea come into my head of relating the ideas of chaos and order with the yin yang symbol. And with the yin is the black with the white dot, and is that right? Yeah. And the white is the yang with the black dot. And I was thinking, well, gee, chaos, in the middle of chaos, you have what's called the central limit theorem. So chaos begets order. Okay, so it arises out of it, and from within a lawful. Okay, it's a lawful understanding of order. Okay. It's basically what's called the central limit theorem, and it's derives from what's called the law of large numbers. Okay, so if you repeat an experiment often enough and you have independent samples, you'll end up with this bell curve. The what's called the normal distribution or Gaussian distribution. And the other section is if you get too much order, then chaos breaks out, and that's kind of obvious within the human realm. If you have a government that is too rigid, eventually the people will revolt and overthrow it. And so it's interesting to me because there's one person, Andrei Kolmogorov, who originated both concepts of randomness, because randomness is a really tricky concept. Okay, one of them is this idea of the repeated experiment. If you keep on doing something over and over again, you see this pattern that comes out, from the randomness. So the randomness has lawfulness within it, and you do that by you find that by repeated experiments. So which I guess would be another way of calling wisdom. If you live long enough, you have enough experience, you start to see the patterns of the Tao. But there's another one. Concept of randomness, and that is the ability to predict. Okay, and that's developed in a theory called algorithmic information theory, which is based upon the idea of a Turing machine. So that if you can calculate something, then it's predictable. Okay, that's the definition of being predictable. Is if you can somehow play with some symbols, because the Turing machine is very general. It's not just numbers. Okay, and so if you can have some ordered way in which you have an algorithm, you play with your symbols, that you can make predictions as to what's going to be the end result of your calculation. And so one of the things that's very interesting is that that you can have basically unbounded complexity. Complexity would be the measure of the program inside of your machine. This is Kolmogorov complexity. How big of a program do you need to be able to calculate the result? In other words. So, but the thing is that you have these numbers that you can't calculate. The program is the number or the sequence of that you are predicting. You can't predict it with something smaller than itself, and so one of the possibilities is that maybe within this extreme randomness, okay, if you take the entire universe and think of it as underlying chaos, which is how people in quantum mechanics see it, that they think that the randomness in quantum mechanics is objective. It's actually real randomness. Then if you think about the whole universe in terms of this algorithmic information theory, that maybe there is a way to calculate the complexity of the universe, the randomness, and that exists only in the mind of God, for instance. Okay, so that maybe maybe there isn't. The randomness is only apparent. Okay, that it's that there is order even in the most seemingly chaotic part of reality. So it's kind of like what what Jason was saying about the Tao, that it's a kind of this lawfulness that is implicit inside of that progression going from through the four different heaven, earth, so on.
Thank you, Charlie. Charlie, I want to ask you one more follow-up question. Tomorrow you're going to be talking about the work of Ian McGilchrist, and he talks about the right brain and the left brain.
Right.
What do you see as a parallels between the right brain and left brain and yin and yang? Folks, by the way, we're going to do a full meetup on this idea. His book is called The Master and His Emissary.
Right. It comes from Nietzsche.
Yes, and it's what is the subtitle? The Divided Brain.
Yeah, the divided brain, and he has a talk called The Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World.
Yes. So my question is that the fundamental concept of the right brain and left brain, how is that related to chaos and order, and how is it related to yin yang? Could you give a very quick, like a maybe 2-minute overview of it so people can connect this meetup with tomorrow's meetup?
Okay, first of all, I want to say this is my interpretation. I'm not saying that I'm speaking for Ian McGilchrist, okay?
Sure.
But my interpretation of that question is that I see the intuitive as being the means by which we manage to live our life. So that in a sense, Taoism is very much like learning to live with the right brain. But the left brain is the part that imposes a vision of order on your experience. So that you need that in order to be able to make decisions, and so on. And so the left brain is kind of a map making a part of the brain where you see how the foot bone is connected to the ankle bone, so on and so forth. So that it's kind of this logical, sequential way of thinking, and so it's the right brain is kind of more of a yin, and the left brain is more of the yang. It's more structure and order and that sort of thing. And so that's kind of how I see it. Yeah.
Wonderful. Folks, for more details, come by at 9 p.m. tomorrow. Next up is going to be Kevin, followed by Brian and Madeline. Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. That's how I'm going to say right brain. Use yin yang. Yeah, right brain is yin. It's a source mostly. Because random or chaotic is everything come from there. Then you put order. Use your left brain. I want to use the basics of physics. Try to understand the four great relationship. The word I'm going to use Avnik used. First time I used to learn instead of follow. This time I use support. The worst order. Nature supports Tao. The Tao supports sky. Sky supports ground. Ground supports human. Let's see human. If without ground, can we stand? Without earth, where are we? If let's see on the sky, we have a sun. Without the sun, where earth come from? It's Tao. Something nature Tao. They followed it. That's why the Tao supports the sky. Even Tao, where's Tao come from? Another something we call, let's say, named nature. Lord, thank you. By the way, I'm going to want to quickly for the person. We use individual. In Chinese, if individual is 2 words, individual person. Normally we call it Ren in human. we translate human or as general. Thank you.
Wonderful. Kevin, I like the term supports. I think that captures relationships very well. Thank you. Next up is Brian, followed by Madeline. Brian.
As regards the relationship between these, the Tao, heaven, earth, and human, the word that comes to my mind is synchronicity. And the reason I say that, I picked that word, is because of C.G. Jung. Carl Jung used that word, and he used it to imply that there were certain events that somehow are related to each other, and he did not understand how they were related. So I think the use of the word synchronicity typically implies no understanding of how they're related, no understanding of cause and effect, but that there is some harmony between these things, or some pattern, as Joe and others have said. The one thought I've had, well, first of all, let me just throw out articles, or the poem 6 talks about the same ideas, I would say in less detail. But at the very end, it has a statement that's not in this 25, and it says, use the Tao effortlessly. Use the Tao effortlessly is the last line of poem 6. And that suggests that the Tao is not just an origin that was back in time, but it's a source that's with us today. And when we talk about, yes, there certainly is canon. You know, if we think about these things, it's useful to think of them in terms of temporal existence, time, but also conditionality could be another way to think about it. That one is conditioned on another in this synchronistic manner. I guess the one question I have.
Brian, let's keep it very short so that because it's way past 11 o'clock. So I want to wrap it up soon.
The one element here that seems to me can be out of sync with the others is the human. And this, I think, has been illustrated in it, and that's just the Taoist understanding that the human can be out of sync. And that's illustrated, I think, for example, with this idea of mandate from heaven, that the proper ruler is the one who has the mandate from heaven. If you don't have the mandate from heaven, you're not going to be successful with crops, wars, and the rest. Tempests and droughts will follow us. And this king then does not have the mandate, even though he might have the position, and therefore needs to be deposed. I'd like to hear Jason's comment on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I think Jason has stepped away. Next up is Madeline.
I'm going to think about it more, so I'm going to pass.
Sure. Thank you. Well, this was wonderful. I want to ask one last question for just quick answers. This is the first impression when you take these 4 things and call all of them great. The first thing that stands in my mind is this is a very elevated view of what humans are. So just quick answers. What view of humans is being propounded here? What is human according to Lao Tzu? Just very quick, couple of sentences answers. Lightning round. So go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to answer. Charlie.
The universe looking back on itself.
Beautiful. Dave.
I would want to stress chaos. That man has a lot of chaos. Earth, we're seeing floods and fires, so Earth has a bunch of chaos. Now you could say heaven has, lightning storms and thunder and lightning and all. It has some chaos, and the Tao, I would say, has no chaos. So I'm going to say there's a hierarchy of the chaos within those 4. It just seems to me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Shane Marie, what's the view of human beings portrayed here?
I think the suggestion is that they're an extension of source, so by default, they're great.
Wonderful, thank you. Maritza.
Children of chaos, extensions of nature.
Wonderful. Joe.
Consciousness. That's why the way I look at this.
Wonderful. All right, folks, amazing discussion, and we will continue. I am glad I requested Jason not to start this in the last half an hour available. We spent almost 2.5 hours on it, and we could have gone for more. And we look forward to continuing with number 26. And I recommend tomorrow's meetup with Charlie on this book by Ian McGilchrist.
Yeah.
Master and his emissary, because it seems to be dealing with a very fundamental theme about order and chaos, between relationship between intuition and reason and logic on one, intuition on one hand, and reason and logic on the other. And he's also trying to look at it in the context of Western history and Western thought. So it's a very big integration looking like. And if people like it, I'm open to doing a series on that one. So if you just want to check out what the book has, and I'm just delighted that Charlie has agreed to give us a little overview. I'm going to be just talking to him about the book and about his approach to comprehensivism. And we will take it from there. So I cordially invite you to join us tomorrow as well. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.